When my brother's wedding photos flooded social media, I saw the beachfront ceremony, the white roses, the entire glittering affair I never got an invitation to. Mom called it a small family ceremony, but the online album showed 67 smiling guests. That night, I booked a solo trip to Colorado. But when I returned, my family found something waiting in the mail, an RSVP from me, attached to a court summons. This event was for family only. My name is Rachel Quinn. I am 34 years old, and my life is a series of well-defined parameters. As a project manager for a sprawling tech firm in Denver, I live by Gantt charts, risk mitigation strategies, and clear, achievable deliverables. My apartment is a testament to this philosophy: minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white, books arranged by author, and not a single object out of place. I chose Denver for the same reason I chose my career: for the clean, thin air and the formidable, silent presence of the Rockies. A constant reminder that some things are solid, immovable, and exist beautifully outside the messy chaos of human relationships. I chose it because it was 300 miles from Ohio. Ohio is where my family lives, encased in the amber of a perfect, small-town American dream. On the surface, they are flawless. The Quinns, my father, Richard Quinn, a man whose posture is as rigid as his principles. The stern patriarch who built a construction empire, Quinn Development, from the ground up. My mother, Eleanor Quinn, a woman who orchestrates social events with the precision of a military general, ensuring the family's public image remains as pristine as her manicured rose garden. And then there is Mark, my older brother, the golden son, the heir apparent. He is handsome, charming, and successful. His life a seamless continuation of our father's legacy. His photo, shaking hands with the mayor, is a recurring feature in the local paper. The annual Quinn family Christmas card is a masterpiece of curated joy, a portrait of success sent to hundreds of their closest friends and business associates. And in this perfect portrait, there has always been a smudge, an outlier they could never quite polish away. Me. I am the problem child, not because I was reckless or wild, but because I was precise. I asked questions they didn't want to answer. I saw discrepancies they preferred to ignore. My quiet, analytical nature was an unwelcome mirror in a house built on pleasant fictions. They didn't want a risk analyst at the dinner table. They wanted a smiling daughter who reflected their own manufactured light back at them. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day that, until that moment, had been perfectly ordinary. The office was humming with its usual low-grade energy, the soft tapping of keyboards, the whir of the servers, the distant murmur of a conference call. I was mapping out the final phase of a software rollout, my screen a mosaic of timelines and progress bars. When a chat window popped up, it was from Sarah, a former high school classmate who now worked in our marketing department, a tenuous link to the Ohio life I had so deliberately left behind. OMG, Rachel. Just saw this on my feed. Your brother's wedding looks absolutely breathtaking. What a beautiful family. Attached was a link to a public photo album on a social media site. I clicked it. My mind, trained to process data, struggled to reconcile the image on the screen with the reality of my life. There was Mark, his smile broad and effortlessly confident in a tailored black tuxedo. Beside him was a woman I'd never seen before, radiant in a cascade of white lace, her hand in his. They were standing on a pristine beach, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of orange and purple. The scene was littered with white roses, but my eyes didn't linger on them. I scanned the background, my project manager's brain automatically taking inventory. I counted the guests, 67 of them, their faces glowing in the warm light, champagne flutes held high. I recognized aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents' business partners, and people I vaguely remembered from childhood holidays. A sea of familiar faces, all gathered to celebrate a monumental family event, an event I knew nothing about. The caption beneath the lead photo, posted by Mark's new wife, read, "The most magical day with our family and friends. The start of forever with my love. Mark Quinn." Below it, A comment from my own mother, a perfect day for our perfect son and our wonderful new daughter. We are so blessed. The words beautiful family and our family echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. I felt a cold wave wash over me, starting in my chest and spreading to my fingertips, making them numb against the keyboard. There had been no invitation, not a call, not a text, not even a mass-produced, calligraphed card sent to the wrong address. I did a frantic, pointless search, my fingers flying through my email inbox, then my spam folder, then my archived messages, searching for the word wedding, nothing. I scrolled through months of text messages, nothing. The exclusion wasn't an accident, it wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate, calculated act, an excision. They had taken a scalpel to the family portrait and neatly cut me out. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact photo, a smiling, perfectly coiffed image of her standing in front of the family home. I pressed call. It rang 3 times, each ring tightening the knot in my stomach. Rachel. Darling. What a surprise. Her voice was light, airy, the same voice she used for garden parties and charity luncheons. It was a voice designed to deflect, to smooth over anything unpleasant. I kept my own voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was choking me. I saw the wedding photos. There was a fractional pause on her end, the only sign that my directness had pierced her composure. Oh, that. Yes, it was lovely, wasn't it? So sudden. You know how Mark is. It was all very last minute. The lie was so effortless, so practiced. Last minute for 67 people, I asked. The number a cold, hard fact. Another pause, this one longer. I could picture her, standing in the marble-floored foyer of the Ohio house, one hand fluttering to her throat. Well, sweetie, it was just a small, intimate ceremony, just family. We didn't want to make it awkward for you. Awkward. The word landed like a stone in my gut. It was their code, their euphemism, their final judgment. Awkward didn't mean I might feel out of place. Awkward meant my very presence was a disruption to their narrative of perfection. Awkward was the label they had assigned to me the day I walked into my father's office, 2 years prior. Holding a ledger that showed a pattern of fraudulent insurance claims and falsified invoices, a scheme my brother Mark was executing to siphon money from their own company. Awkward was what my father had called my decision to report that activity to the Internal Ethics Committee, an act he had reframed not as integrity, but as the ultimate betrayal. You don't air family business. He had seethed, his face a mask of cold fury. You have no loyalty. They didn't want the person who knew the truth to be standing on the beach, smiling for pictures at a wedding likely paid for with the very money I had tried to stop them from stealing. Awkward meant me. I see, I said. The words were ice. There was nothing else to say. I ended the call without another word. The screen going dark. The silence in my office was absolute. I stared at my monitor, at the intricate project timeline I had been building. It all seemed so absurd, so meaningless. My neat, ordered world felt like a flimsy stage set. On the edge of the screen, a forgotten browser tab displayed a pop-up ad, its algorithm blissfully unaware of my personal apocalypse. Escape to the Rockies, last-minute deals on flights to Aspen. And in that moment, something shifted. The deep, visceral hurt that had hollowed me out began to solidify. It cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a single, crystalline thought. The logic was as clean and brutal as a line of code. They had defined the terms, they had drawn the boundary, they had officially, and with 67 witnesses, declared me an outsider. If they were going to sever me from the family, then I would let that same family be consumed by the fire of its own making. They built their perfect house on a foundation of lies. I was simply going to show them where the cracks were. My fingers moved from the phone to the keyboard, my movements calm and deliberate. I clicked on the pop-up ad. The pain hadn't vanished, but it was now fuel. I wasn't booking a trip to escape or to heal. I was booking a trip to work. I wasn't going to Aspen to forget. I was going there to calculate, to plan, to build my own project, one with a very different kind of deliverable. I selected the dates, entered my information, and clicked Confirm Purchase. The confirmation email chimed in my inbox a moment later. My trip was set. My RSVP was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The air in my Denver apartment is still, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside my head. I lay a black suitcase open on my bed, the empty space a blank slate. Packing for this trip feels methodical, a familiar sequence of actions to ground me. But every item I touch seems to pull me back through time, back to the polished wood and stifling air of Quinn Development. The company was my family's crown jewel, a mid-sized construction firm that built its reputation on sturdy, reliable homes and my father's ironclad handshake. The slogan, plastered on billboards across 3 counties, was Quinn Development, a legacy of trust. But a legacy, I had learned, is just a story told often enough to be believed. Officially, the company was in my brother's name, Mark Quinn, president. It was a strategic move made years ago, presenting the next generation to the city council, a fresh face for a new era of municipal contracts. In reality, my father's hand was on every blueprint, his shadow in every boardroom. Mark was the handsome facade on a building with a rotting foundation. For 5 years, I worked within those walls. I fold a crisp, gray blouse, and for a moment, I'm back in my old office, a small, windowless room in the back of the building. I was the head of contracts and accounts, a title that sounded important but was really a catch-all for the unglamorous. Essential work no one else wanted. I managed payroll, processed invoices, and reconciled accounts. I was good at it. The clean, unassailable logic of numbers was a refuge. A spreadsheet doesn't lie. A contract has clear terms. In the chaos of my family's unspoken resentments and carefully managed appearances, my job was the one place where things made sense. I was trusted because I was meticulous, and because they assumed my loyalty, like my last name, was non-negotiable. The discovery wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, creeping sickness in the data. It started with an invoice from a subcontractor I'd never heard of, Apex Steel Fabrication. The amount was substantial, for materials on a municipal warehouse project. But when I cross-referenced the delivery manifests, there was no record of Apex Steel. I asked Mark about it. He waved it off, a charming, dismissive flick of his wrist. They're new. Rach, Dad's trying them out. It's all good. But it wasn't. I started digging in my off hours. The fluorescent hum of the office, my only companion long after everyone else had gone home. I found more invoices from Apex, and from other companies that seemed to exist only on paper. They all coincided with large insurance claims filed by Quinn Development for material loss or on-site damage. Mark was creating ghost vendors, billing the company for materials that were never ordered, then filing insurance claims for those non-existent materials when they inevitably went missing. It was a perfect, closed loop of fraud. He was stealing from the insurance companies, enriching himself, and burying the evidence in the very ledgers I was paid to maintain. The signatures on the payment authorizations were his, crisp, confident, and utterly damning. I remember the weight of the file I compiled, the sickness in my stomach as I walked toward my father's office. I still clung to a shred of childish belief that he would be horrified, that he would see his son's actions as a perversion of the legacy he'd built. I laid the printouts on his vast mahogany desk, pointing to the inconsistencies, the impossible numbers, the forged signatures. I spoke calmly, factually, presenting it as a problem we needed to solve. He listened without a word, his face unreadable. When I finished, he didn't look at the papers, he looked at me. His eyes, the same blue as mine, were filled not with concern, but with a glacial fury. "And what?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you plan to do with this?" "We have to fix it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to report it." He leaned back in his leather chair, the sound of it groaning under his weight filling the room. "You don't report family, you protect family." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city his company had helped build. "This is a betrayal. Rachel, not what Mark did, what you are doing, now. That was the moment the chasm between us became permanent. He wasn't a father disappointed in a criminal son. He was a king furious at a disloyal subject. 2 days later, I was formally dismissed. The meeting was short, attended by my father and a smirking Mark. They used sterile, corporate language, restructuring, eliminating redundancies. But as I was leaving, my box of personal items in my arms, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is for the best," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "We have to protect the family's honor." The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking. Their honor was a shield to hide behind, not a standard to live up to. I was the dishonorable one, not for my actions, but for my refusal to be complicit in theirs. And Mark. While I was packing my life into boxes and moving halfway across the country to start over, Mark was being celebrated, 6 months after I was fired. Quinn Development was awarded a new $4.2 million municipal contract to develop a new community center. I saw the picture online, Mark shaking the mayor's hand, my father standing beside him, beaming with pride. There were no consequences. Their risk had paid off. The system had rewarded them. I left Ohio in silence. I didn't fight them, didn't argue or plead, but I wasn't idle. In the 48 hours between my father's verdict and my official termination, before my network access was revoked, I did my own meticulous work. I wasn't thinking of revenge then. It was pure, unadulterated instinct. The project manager in me couldn't leave a project unfinished. I copied everything, every email chain with Mark's predated approvals, every scanned invoice from Apex Steel, every fraudulent insurance claim. I compiled it all onto a single, encrypted USB drive, a small, silver stick that held the truth of their legacy. It was my severance package. Now, as I stand in my quiet Denver apartment, I pull that same USB drive from a locked drawer. It feels cool and heavy in my palm. I look at my phone, at the wedding photo still open on the screen, the bride's diamond necklace, the ridiculously large floral arrangements, the oceanfront venue that must have cost a fortune. It was all there, in the data on this drive. This wedding, this celebration of their perfect family, was funded by the ghost contracts. It was a party paid for by a crime they had exiled me for discovering. For the past year, I had said nothing. My silence wasn't forgiveness. It was observation. From my apartment in Denver. I tracked their progress. I read the glowing articles in the Ohio business journals. I downloaded the public filings for their new city contracts. I was no longer just the keeper of their past sins. I was becoming the archivist of their present ones. They thought I had been vanquished, a minor problem that had been neatly solved. They had no idea I was simply gathering more evidence. I slipped the USB drive into a side pocket of my laptop bag. My packing is almost complete. My movements are steady. My purpose clear. They had fired me to protect the family's honor. Now, I was going to show them what that honor was truly worth. I zip the suitcase shut. The sound is final. A sharp, satisfying click. The drive from Denver into the mountains is a slow, steady climb into silence. The city's sprawl gives way to foothills, then to the stark, majestic peaks of the Rockies. I drive with the windows down. The crisp, pine-scented air a clean rinse for my cluttered thoughts. I check into a hotel near Aspen that calls itself a lodge. It's a cathedral of exposed timber and river stone, with vaulted ceilings and a lobby dominated by a roaring fireplace the size of my car. The place smells of wood smoke and money. It's designed for blissful escape, for rosy-cheeked families returning from the slopes and romantic couples cocooned in cashmere. The irony is a bitter taste in my mouth. I am here alone, and I am not escaping anything. I am here to confront it. My suite is obscene, larger than my entire apartment. It has its own fireplace, a balcony with a panoramic view of the snow-dusted peaks, and a king-sized bed that could sleep 4. I give the stunning vista a cursory glance before drawing the heavy curtains, plunging the room into a warm, artificial twilight. I don't unpack the few clothes I brought. Instead, I place my laptop on the polished oak desk, plug it in, and retrieve the small silver USB drive from my bag. The real work begins. This is not a vacation. It is a meticulously planned work retreat. My project timeline is aggressive. The deliverables critical. The first phase is communication. I spend an hour setting up a new, anonymous email account through an encrypted service, routing it through 3 different foreign servers. The username is nondescript, a random collection of letters and numbers, C734B9. From this digital ghost, I begin to write. My audience is not a friend or a confidant, but the City of Oakley's Public Auditor's office. My fingers fly across the keyboard, the text stark and emotionless against the white screen. I frame the complaint not as a jilted daughter, but as a concerned taxpayer with inside knowledge of municipal contracts. To whom it may concern. I type. I am writing to report a pattern of systemic billing fraud and corruption concerning contracts awarded to Quinn Development over the past 36 months. I don't use names like my father or my brother. I use their titles: Richard Quinn, founder, Mark Quinn, president. I reference specific projects, dates, and contract numbers. My language is sterile and precise as an auditor's report. I am not telling a story of betrayal. I am presenting a dataset of a crime. Next, I open the files on the silver USB drive. The numbers and figures I had memorized from years of meticulous work and a year of quiet observation now become exhibits in my case. I attach the bank statements I legally obtained through public record requests for the city projects, highlighting the transfers from Quinn Development's corporate account to a holding company I knew Mark controlled. Then, the final, damning piece of new evidence. From a source inside their accounting department, a junior clerk I had been kind to years ago, who still felt a sliver of loyalty to me and a mountain of resentment toward Mark, I had obtained a record of a recent transfer, $420,000, moved from the corporate account to Mark's personal checking account just 3 weeks before the wedding. The memo line was insultingly simple. Executive bonus. I attached the document, a clean, undeniable link between the company's fraudulent income and his personal slush fund. My eyes feel dry and grainy. I get up and pour a glass of water. Catching my reflection in the dark television screen, I look pale, tired, but my expression is one of intense, unwavering focus. I return to the desk and, on a morbid impulse, pull up the wedding photos again. My gaze lands on the bride. She is smiling, oblivious. Around her neck is a delicate, blindingly brilliant diamond necklace. I zoom in. I know that necklace. I remember the purchase order. It was 2 years ago. From a jeweler known for its discretion and high prices. The expense was logged in the corporate account under client relations. A gift for the wife of a city planning commissioner. We were lobbying for a zoning variance, a bribe, and now it was repurposed as a token of love, hanging around the neck of Mark's wife. I take a screenshot of the smiling bride and place it in a folder next to a digital copy of the original expense report. Exhibit B. I work for hours, compiling, annotating, and organizing. Every file, every statement, every screenshot is a nail I am hammering into their carefully constructed facade. When I'm finished, I have a single, compressed folder containing the entire case, the evidence of the ghost contracts, the illegal transfer of funds, the misappropriated client gift. I drag the folder onto a new blank USB drive I bought for this purpose. The drive needs a name. My fingers hesitate over the keyboard for only a second before I type the 4 letters R, S, V, P. Répondez s'il vous plaît. Please respond. My official reply to the wedding invitation I never received. I lean back, the leather of the desk chair creaking in the silent room. I didn't go to their party. I didn't want their lukewarm champagne or a slice of their 3-tiered cake. I am preparing a different kind of event, a different kind of feast, a feast of consequences, and a phrase echoes in my mind, a perfect, chilling refrain. It's my mother's voice, dripping with condescension from that final, awful phone call. Sorry, dear. I whisper to the empty, luxurious room. This event is for family only. That is a sentence they will come to understand. As evening falls, the first snow begins. fat, silent flakes drift down outside my window, coating the pines and peaks in a blanket of pristine white. It's beautiful. In a cold and indifferent way, the world outside is being purified, buried. It's time. I finalized 2 packages. The first is a digital submission. I attach the RSVP folder to my anonymous email and send it to the official tip line for the Oakley City Auditor. I watch the progress bar, and with a soft whoosh, it's gone, irretrievable. The second package is physical. I've printed hard copies of the most damning financial records, the ones showing undeclared income and fraudulent business expenses. These are not for the city. These are for an entirely different, and far more feared, authority. I slide the documents into a sturdy manila envelope addressed to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I put on my coat and walk out of the opulent lodge, the cold air a shock against my skin. I drive 20 minutes to the next town over, a small, sleepy place with a single post office. I don't use the hotel's mail service. I leave no trail. Inside the quiet building, I purchase a book of stamps and affix them to the envelope. The weight of it in my hands feels significant, a tangible representation of the justice I am setting into motion. I slide it through the brass mail slot. The soft thud as it lands inside the collection box is the only sound. It's the starting gun they will never hear. I walk back to my car, the snow falling faster now, covering my tracks. The trip is over. The project has just begun. I returned to Denver and resumed my life with a quiet, humming intensity. My trip to the mountains was a closed loop, a secret between me and the silent peaks. I went back to work, managed my projects, and fell into my routine. But now, my routine included a new task. Every morning, with my first cup of coffee, and every evening before bed, I scanned the online edition of the Oakley Town Chronicle. For 10 days, there was nothing but the usual small-town news. Then, 1 week after the wedding, it appeared. It was a feature piece, a glowing homage to my family, perfectly timed to coincide with the announcement of their new municipal contract. The headline was almost laughably self-important: The Quinn Legacy. Father and son, building the future. The article was a masterpiece of journalistic fellatio, quoting my father on the importance of community and my brother on his innovative vision. It painted them as local heroes, a dynasty of builders creating the very foundation of the town's prosperity. And beneath the headline was the photo. My father and Mark, standing on the steps of the Oakley City Hall, shaking hands and smiling their practiced, confident smiles. They looked like gods of industry, bestowing their benevolence upon the town. The hypocrisy was so potent, it was almost beautiful. It was the perfect tinder for the fire I was about to start. I didn't react with anger. I reacted with strategy. I opened my LinkedIn profile, a platform built on the delicate ecosystem of professional reputation. I copied the link to the article and created a new post. I looked at the picture of my father and brother, their faces beaming with fraudulent integrity. Then I added a single, simple sentence above the link, a bit of corporate jargon, a project manager's axiom that, on its own, was utterly innocuous. Integrity builds stronger foundations. I hit post. The click was quiet, almost anticlimactic. For the first few hours, nothing happened. A few of my colleagues liked it. My boss commented, "Well said, Rachel." Then, the ripple effect began. Someone from a construction trade group I belonged to shared it. Then a former employee of Quinn Development, a man they'd fired unceremoniously 5 years ago, shared it with the comment, "Interesting choice of words." That was the first small crack in the dam. By the next morning, my notifications were exploding. The post was being shared outside my immediate network, spreading through the Ohio construction and political communities. People were reading between the lines. The comments section became a cryptic, simmering forum of innuendo. Some foundations are built on sand. One person wrote, "Ask about their subcontractor payment schedule." Wrote another, "My single sentence had become a Rorschach test." People saw in it whatever simmering resentments they already held against my family's empire. Within 48 hours, the post had been shared over 10,000 times. My family's carefully crafted press release had been hijacked. It was now an exhibit in a public trial, and my 5-word comment was the prosecution's opening statement. The silence from Ohio was absolute. No calls from my mother, no texts from Mark. They were in lockdown, watching the digital wildfire spread. Undoubtedly furious and confused about its origin, they would never suspect me. I was the exiled daughter, the emotional one. This attack was too cold, too precise. Then came the message I had been waiting for. It wasn't from my family. It was a direct message on LinkedIn from a man named Ben Carter. His profile identified him as an investigative reporter for a major statewide newspaper, one known for digging into municipal corruption. His message was short and to the point. Ms. Quinn, your post is generating a lot of conversation. Given your last name, I'm assuming you have a unique perspective on Quinn development. I'm looking into their contracts with the city. Is there anything you can tell me? My heart hammered in my chest, a surge of adrenaline. This was the critical juncture. I could have unloaded everything, poured out the whole sordid story. But I knew that would be a mistake. An emotional, vengeful daughter was a questionable source. An anonymous, factual tip was a story. I typed my reply, my fingers steady. I can't comment personally, but if you're a good reporter, you'll pull the public vendor payment records for the 2024 Civic Center project. Check vendor 472. I hit send. His reply came back in less than a minute. Thank you. That was all I needed. I had given him the thread. Vendor 472 was Apex Steel Fabrication, Mark's most profitable ghost. I knew from public records that they had been paid over $500,000 on that project alone. I also knew that a reporter as thorough as Ben Carter would discover within an hour that Apex Steel had no physical address, no corporate registration with the state, and no other clients. It was a phantom, a thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. 3 days later, Carter's first article dropped. It wasn't on the front page, but it was there, a quiet bomb ticking in the business section. The headline was carefully worded, Oakley City contract under review after payment irregularities surface. The article detailed an anonymous tip that had prompted the city auditor to launch a formal review. It mentioned significant payments made to a vendor, identified only as 472, that appeared to have no legitimate business license. My father and Mark were quoted, offering a terse no comment through a newly hired PR firm. The story was picked up by political blogs and local news aggregators. The comments on my original LinkedIn post became more pointed. With people now sharing Carter's article, the narrative was spinning out of my control, which was exactly what I wanted. It was no longer my private vendetta. It was a matter of public concern. I sat in my quiet Denver apartment, watching the chain reaction I had started. The family was still silent, but I could feel their panic across the 1,000 miles that separated us. I pictured them gathered in my father's study, the air thick with fear and accusation. They were reading every article, every comment, every word. They were watching their name, their legacy, the very thing they valued above all else, being questioned and tarnished in a public forum. They had built their house on a lie, and they could now hear the floorboards starting to creak. They were afraid, and I knew, with a cold, clear certainty, that this was only the beginning. The first crack in their wall of silence came not as a roar, but as a shrill, panicked ringtone. It was my mother. I was in a quarterly review meeting, my screen filled with progress charts and KPIs. When her name flashed across my phone, I excused myself, stepped into the sterile quiet of a small conference room, and answered. The carefully curated calm she normally wore was gone, stripped away, leaving a raw, grating panic. Rachel. What in God's name are you doing? Her voice was a high-pitched quaver. There was no preamble, no pretense. I leaned against the cool glass wall, my own voice a study in placid detachment. I'm not sure what you mean. Mother, I'm at work. Don't you play games with me. The newspapers, the blogs, that reporter, Carter, he called the house. He called your father's office. People are asking questions. Rachel, Terrible questions. I let the silence hang for a moment, forcing her to stew in it. That sounds stressful, I finally said, my tone as mild as if we were discussing the weather. I wouldn't know anything about it. I've been busy. I took that trip. Remember, to clear my head. It has nothing to do with me. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the sound of my own words being thrown back at her. She knew. She had no proof, but she knew this was my handiwork. The use of her own dismissive excuse as my alibi was a cruelty I had learned from her. Your father. He's built this company for 50 years, she stammered, her voice cracking. His reputation. Reputations should be built on strong foundations, I said, quoting my LinkedIn post. Isn't that right? She hung up. I stood there for a long moment, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. There was no triumph, just a cold, hollow ache. This was the first casualty, the pretense that we could ever speak to each other again. Mark's approach was different. It came later that night, a text message that glowed on my screen in the darkness of my apartment. It was stripped of all charm, a blunt instrument of his rage. Stop it. Whatever you're doing, stop it right now. You're destroying everything. I looked at his words. Everything didn't mean our family, whatever was left of it. Everything meant his money, his power, his comfortable life. He saw my actions not as a quest for justice, but as a simple act of demolition. In a way, he was right. I typed my reply, my thumbs moving with cold precision. No, I'm just RSVPing to the family invitation. I sent it and immediately blocked his number. I didn't want to see his response. My message was not the start of a conversation. It was a final statement. The days that followed were a cascade of public humiliation for the Quinn family. The reporter, Ben Carter, was relentless. His follow-up article was a bombshell. The city auditor's preliminary review, prompted by his inquiries, had unearthed a pattern of fraudulent billing that went far beyond a single ghost vendor. The investigation had expanded, now encompassing 7 municipal projects spanning the last 5 years. The number was staggering, hinting at a long-term systemic conspiracy to defraud the city. The story was no longer confined to the business section. It was front-page news. And then, the kill shot. The piece of evidence I had held back, the one I had hoped would surface from another source. Finally did. A mid-level accountant at Quinn Development, a man I knew to be terrified of my father but morally conflicted, anonymously leaked a document to Carter's paper. It was an internal email, dated 3 years prior. The subject line was Special Project Vendor Protocol. It was a thinly veiled set of instructions, written by Mark, on how to process payments to unlisted priority vendors, the ghosts. It was the operational playbook for their entire scheme, and at the bottom of the email, authorizing the protocol, were 2 digital signatures, stark and undeniable. Mark's lazy, arrogant scrawl, and my father's rigid, authoritative script. The newspaper published a scanned image of the email. I stared at it on my laptop screen, my breath catching in my throat. I opened the encrypted folder on my USB drive and pulled up my own copy of that same email. I had saved it the day before I was fired. The signatures were a perfect match. It was real. It was public. It was over. A strange sound escaped my lips, a choked, humorless laugh. My vision blurred. I was crying. The tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I wasn't crying for them. I was crying for the sheer, monumental waste of it all, for the lie I had been born into, the lie they had worked so hard to maintain. They built their empire on lies. I whispered to the empty room. And then another memory surfaced, sharp and painful, a memory of a document they had made me sign, about 4 years ago, before I understood the full scope of their corruption. My father had come to my desk with a stack of quarterly filings for one of the very projects now under investigation. He needed them notarized, and the company notary was out sick. Just sign here, Rachel, he had said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's just a formality. I was a licensed notary, a qualification I'd gotten to make my job easier. I remember my hesitation. a knot of unease in my stomach. The numbers seemed slightly off, but I was his daughter, his employee. I'd trusted him. I had stamped and signed it. The irony was acidic, burning in my throat. That document, my signature on it, was now almost certainly sitting in an evidence box in the city auditor's office, a document they had pressured me into signing. A link in their chain of deceit was now a weapon aimed directly at them. The very paperwork they used to bind me to their lies was now going to help set the truth free. My laugh and my tears mingled, the sound of a victory that felt so profoundly like a loss. The dominoes fell faster than even I had anticipated. The leaked email was the tipping point, transforming the investigation from a financial review into a criminal inquiry. The Oakley City Council convened an emergency session. The result was a swift, brutal, and public execution. A local news station carried the press conference live, and I watched from my desk in Denver, a remote observer at the demolition of my own family. The council chairperson, a woman with a grim, determined face, announced the immediate and indefinite suspension of all active and pending contracts with Quinn Development. Furthermore, due to the severity of the allegations, the city had successfully petitioned the court to freeze all corporate and affiliated personal assets pending the outcome of the investigation. The words hung in the air, assets frozen. It was a corporate death sentence. The flow of money, the lifeblood of their empire, had been severed at the artery. I imagined the chaos construction sites grinding to a halt, massive cranes going still against the sky, hundreds of employees suddenly jobless, and the phones at Quinn Development ringing with the frantic calls of creditors and subcontractors. I pictured my father in his mahogany-paneled office, a king in a castle whose drawbridge had just been permanently raised. The call came that evening. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 4 times, a small, petty assertion of control. Before answering and putting it on speaker, I wanted to be able to hear every nuance of his desperation. Rachel Mark's voice was a ragged whisper, stripped of its usual confident swagger. It was the voice of a cornered animal. "Mark," I said, my tone even and cool. "Rachel, please." The word please sounded foreign, rusty from disuse. "You have to stop this. They're going to prosecute. The district attorney's office is involved. They're talking about racketeering charges." I pictured him in his new home, the one from the glossy magazine spreads, the walls probably feeling like they were closing in. I felt a flicker of something, a ghost of pity, but I extinguished it. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness they had trained out of me. "Did they invite me to the wedding?" I asked. My voice was quiet, almost conversational, a stiletto sliding between his ribs. There was a choked sound on the other end, a mix of disbelief and fury. "What the wedding? What the hell does that have to do with anything? My life is falling apart. And you're talking about the goddamn wedding." "It has everything to do with everything," I said calmly. "You had a party to celebrate the family. I wasn't invited, so I decided to have my own. This is it." "It wasn't my choice," he finally screamed, the whisper exploding into a raw, desperate roar. "You know how Dad is. And Mom, she said it would be awkward, that you would make a scene." The excuse was so pathetic, so transparently cowardly. It was almost insulting. He was a grown man, the president of a multi-million-dollar company, and he was still hiding behind our parents' skirts. He had stood by, silent and complicit, as they had erased me. His comfort was more important than his sister. "Awkward," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Let's talk about choices. Mark, the choice to create ghost vendors. Was that yours? The choice to sign fraudulent insurance claims. What about the choice to transfer $420,000 of laundered money into a side account for your new wife? 3 weeks before you stood on that beach and promised to be a man of honor, whose choice was that?" The silence that followed was absolute. I had just read back to him the core of the prosecution's case, confirming his deepest fear. I knew everything, and if I knew, they would soon know, too. In that profound silence, I heard another sound, faint but unmistakable. A woman, sobbing in the background. His bride, the dream of a perfect life, the legacy she had married into, was dissolving into tears on the other end of the line. The sound was more satisfying than his screams. It was the sound of reality crashing their party. His voice, when it finally returned, was broken. "We can fix this. Rachel, you and me. We can go to them. Say there was a misunderstanding, a mistake in the books. I'll pay the money back. We can fix this." He still didn't get it. He was still operating under the old family rules, where problems were hidden, deals were made, and inconvenient truths were buried. He thought this was a negotiation. "I already did fix it. Mark," I said, my voice sharp and final. "Legally." I let that sink in. I had fixed the rot, the lies, the endemic corruption he and our father had cultivated for years. I hadn't hidden it. I had exposed it to the light. I had taken their mess and handed it over to the one system they couldn't bribe or intimidate: the law. "What does that mean?" he whispered. "It means I'm hanging up now," I said. And I did. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the table. The silence in my apartment was vast. It was done. The final confrontation was over. Not with a bang, but with a sob and a whisper. I walked to my window and looked out at the lights of Denver. A city that felt like my own. A life I had built myself. A family, I realized, is a fragile ecosystem. It can survive arguments and anger, distance and time, but it cannot survive the cold, deliberate act of erasure, the decision that one of its own members no longer matters. It hadn't been the fraud or the lies that had ultimately brought the House of Quinn down. It was one unsent invitation. I flew back to Ohio on a Tuesday. The flight was unremarkable, the sky a flat, gray sheet that matched the cold. Metallic feeling in my gut. This wasn't a return. It was an epilogue. I was there to witness the final deliverable of my project, to see the edifice of my family's life publicly condemned. I took a cab from the airport directly to Oakley City Hall, the same building where my father and brother had posed for their triumphant photograph just weeks before. Today, it was a circus. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky like skeletal trees. A crowd of reporters, angry-looking former employees, and morbidly curious townspeople clogged the entrance. The public hearing was held in the main council chamber, a grand room with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that felt more like a courtroom than a municipal office. Every seat was taken. I slipped in through a side door and found a single empty chair in the last row, a shadowy corner from which I could see everything. I put on a pair of large, dark sunglasses, pulling a featureless gray coat tighter around me. I was an anonymous spectator at the public autopsy of my own family. They entered from a private door near the front, a somber procession. My father walked first, his back ramrod straight, his face a mask of stoic fury. He looked thinner, older, but still unbroken. My mother followed, her face pale and taut beneath a veneer of impeccable makeup, her eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the clicking cameras. And then Mark, flanked by two lawyers in $1,000 suits. The swagger was gone, replaced by a pasty, hunted look. His eyes darted around the room, a nervous tick. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. They took their seats at a large table facing the council, a family unit on display, united at last in their disgrace. The proceedings began. It was not a trial, the council chairperson clarified, but a formal hearing to present the findings of the city auditor's investigation and to vote on a course of action. A special counsel for the city, a sharp woman in her 50s, took the floor. What followed was the systematic, dispassionate dismantling of a legacy. She spoke in a calm, measured tone, but her words were devastating. Using a large projector screen, she laid out the case, piece by agonizing piece. First, the ghost contracts. Invoices from Apex Steel Fabrication flashed on the screen, the ones I knew by heart. She detailed how the company, which had no physical address and no employees, had billed the city for over $2 million in materials that were never delivered. Then came the bank statements, intricate webs of transfers from Quinn Development to shell corporations and then to personal accounts. She presented the $420,000 executive bonus transferred to Mark just before his wedding. A collective gasp went through the room. Finally, she displayed the email, the special project vendor protocol. My father's and Mark's signatures were magnified on the screen, large and damning. The special counsel read key phrases aloud, her voice ringing with clinical precision: expedited payment processing, discretionary approval, president's authorization. She was narrating their crime, using their own words, with evidence I had curated in a lonely hotel room in the mountains. I watched their faces. My father stared at the screen, his jaw tight. Mark wouldn't look. He just stared down at the polished surface of the table, as if he could will himself to disappear through it. When the presentation concluded, the chairperson opened the floor to questions from the accredited press. Hands shot up. The first few questions were procedural. Then Ben Carter, the reporter who had broken the story, stood up. His voice cut through the murmur. "This question is for the city auditor. The sheer volume and specificity of this evidence is remarkable. Can you tell us who the original source was, who provided the initial tip and the documents that started this investigation?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to the city auditor, an older man with tired eyes. He adjusted his microphone. "The city's whistleblower policy protects the identity of sources," he said formally. "All I am at liberty to say is that the initial complaint and supporting documentation were submitted to our office anonymously." Anonymous. The word hung in the air. A phantom in the room. I saw Mark's head snap up. His eyes, filled with a desperate, frantic energy, began to scan the crowd. He was searching for the ghost, the architect of his ruin. His gaze swept past me once, then flickered back, snagging on my familiar silhouette, even through the disguise of the coat and glasses. Our eyes locked across the crowded chamber. There was no doubt in his expression. In that instant, he knew. He knew it all. The trip, the silence, the cold, methodical destruction. It was me. His face was a storm of emotions: shock, rage, and a flicker of something that looked like pleading. I offered him nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no remorse. I simply gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug of my shoulders, a gesture that said everything. What did you expect? The council chairperson called for order and began to read the final resolution. The legalese was dense, but the conclusion was clear. And therefore, be it resolved that all municipal contracts with Quinn Development are hereby terminated, effective immediately, and be it further resolved that the full and complete findings of this investigation, including all evidence of potential criminal conduct, be referred to the district attorney's office for prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. The chamber exploded. The gavel banged uselessly as reporters shouted. Cameras flashed, and a wave of noise crashed over us. In the center of the storm, my family sat frozen, their faces ashen. Their empire had been officially condemned. This was my cue. My work here was done. I stood up and began to move toward the exit, slipping through the chaotic scrum. I was almost at the door when a hand grabbed my arm. It was a reporter, a young woman with a microphone thrust toward my face. She must have seen the exchange with Mark. "Wait, who are you?" she yelled over the din. "Mark Quinn was looking right at you. Do you have a connection to this? Who are you?" I gently pulled my arm free. I didn't look at her, but toward the wreckage of my family at the front of the room. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I leaned slightly toward the microphone, my voice a quiet counterpoint to the surrounding chaos. "Just family." Then I turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving the noise and the flashing lights behind me. I stepped out into the cold, clean Ohio air, a free woman. I didn't stay in Ohio for long. After leaving City Hall, I drove my rental car through the familiar tree-lined streets of my hometown, a ghost moving through my own past. The city felt smaller, the houses closer together than I remembered. On instinct, I found myself turning onto the long, winding road that led to the house I grew up in, the Quinn house. It wasn't a home. It was a statement, a sprawling colonial with pristine white pillars and black shutters. set far back from the road on a manicured lawn my mother had once referred to as her canvas. I pulled the car over across the street, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, and just watched. The house was unnervingly still. The curtains were all drawn. The usually vibrant rose bushes in my mother's garden were starting to wilt, a few brown-edged petals clinging sadly to the stems. A newspaper lay on the front walk, still wrapped in its plastic sleeve, starting to yellow in the afternoon sun. The place was locked, vacant, a stage after the final performance. This was the backdrop for every perfect family photo, every holiday gathering, every carefully orchestrated moment of the Quinn legacy. Now, it looked like a mausoleum. I don't know how long I sat there, tracing the lines of the roof, remembering which window was mine. A part of me expected a light to flicker on, to see a shadow move behind the curtains, but there was nothing. They were gone, hiding, most likely, at some second home, waiting for the legal storm to either pass or consume them entirely. As I was about to drive away, a mail truck pulled up to the curb in front of the house. The mail carrier, a woman I didn't recognize, got out and walked toward the ornate, black mailbox. She paused, looking at a large, certified mail envelope in her hand, then looked at the silent house. She seemed hesitant to leave it. Her eyes scanned the street and found me, sitting in my parked car. With a sigh, she began to fill out a notification slip to leave on the door. An impulse I couldn't explain made me get out of the car. I walked across the street, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet afternoon. "Excuse me," I said. She turned, her expression wary. "Can I help you?" "That letter," I said, nodding toward the envelope. "Is it for the Quinns?" "I can't discuss mail with anyone but the addressee," she said, her voice firm, professional. "My name is Rachel Quinn," I said, pulling my driver's license from my wallet. She looked from the license to my face, her expression softening with a flicker of recognition, probably from the news. She glanced at the envelope again. The addressee line was not for Richard or Mark Quinn. It was addressed to their family estate lawyer, but the line below it read, COO, the heirs of the Quinn Family Trust. Technically, that was still me. For now. "I see," she said slowly. "You'll need to sign for it." She handed me the electronic scanner and the stiff envelope. I scribbled my name, my signature feeling alien in this context. The envelope was from a prestigious downtown law firm, the one my father had used for decades. It was thick, heavy with consequence. I walked back to my car, the letter a cold weight in my hand. I didn't open it right away. I drove to a small park by the river, a place I used to go to escape the suffocating perfection of my family's home, and sat on a cold metal bench. With steady hands, I tore it open. The language was dense, filled with legal jargon, but the message was brutally clear. It was a formal notification of a petition to amend the Quinn Family Trust. In light of recent events and the potential for civil and criminal liabilities against the estate, my father and Mark, as the primary trustees, were legally restructuring the distribution of assets, and there it was, in a stark, numbered clause, my name. Rachel Ann Quinn was to be officially removed as a beneficiary. I had been written out, disinherited, the final, legal severing. I read the sentence over and over. I should have felt something rage, pain, a sense of loss. Instead, what I felt was a profound and unsettling calm. It was a formality, really, the final piece of paperwork in a transaction that had been completed years ago. They hadn't just disowned me now. They had been disowning me my whole life, in small and large ways. This was just the notarized copy. In my purse, I had a book of matches. I took out the legal document, all 4 pages of it, and held a corner to the flame. The paper caught, curling and blackening, the legalese of my erasure turning to smoke and ash. I dropped the burning pages into an empty trash bin and watched until the last ember died. "Rachel, is that you?" I looked up. Mrs. Gable, our next-door neighbor for my entire childhood, was standing a few feet away, holding the leash of her small, trembling dog. Her face was a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. "Hello." Mrs. Gable, I said. Oh, my dear, she said, her voice a hushed whisper. We've been reading about everything. Are you all right? I stood up, brushing the ash from my fingers. I gave her a small, tight smile, a performance of strength I knew she would report back to the rest of the neighborhood. Better than ever, I said, my voice clear and bright. She looked relieved, as if my answer absolved her of any further need for concern. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before she and her dog continued on their way. I watched her go, the lie I had just told echoing in the quiet air. Better than ever. I had justice. I had exposed the truth. I didn't need their house, their trust fund, their blood money. I had something cleaner, something I had earned myself my integrity. But as I walked back to my car, a strange, hollow feeling settled in my chest, a void. It was the specific, unnerving emptiness of seeing your own name officially struck from the record of your own family. It was one thing to leave. It was another to be told, in the cold, hard language of the law, that you were never really there at all. I remembered something my mother had said to me during a fight years ago, long before the fraud, when I had questioned some small, social hypocrisy. Her face had tightened, and she'd said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "Oh, Rachel, you just don't understand how this family works. You've always been such an outsider." At the time, it had felt like a wound. Now, it felt like a diagnosis. I started the car, the engine a low hum in the fading light. She was right. I had always been an outsider. I was the one who couldn't just smile and accept the pleasant fiction. I was the variable they couldn't control, and sitting there, in the quiet of my rental car, looking at the ashes of my inheritance, I thought, now you're right. Mother, it's official. But it's also fair. They had finally made me what they always believed I was, and in doing so, they had given me the freedom to become the one thing they could never be honest. I had been back in Denver for a month. Life had settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The storm in Ohio had become a distant hum on the national newswire, a developing story about municipal corruption that felt increasingly disconnected from my own life. I was tracking a new software project, spending my evenings hiking in the foothills, feeling the crisp autumn air scrape my lungs clean. I was moving on. I thought I had closed that chapter, locked the door, and thrown away the key. Then, one evening, there was a knock, not the sharp, quick rap of a delivery person, but a hesitant, almost soft knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, my body tensing. Standing in the hallway of my quiet, orderly apartment building was the ghost of my former life. It was Mark. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. The expensive, tailored suit he wore was deeply wrinkled, the knot of his silk tie askew. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight, his face drawn and gaunt. The easy, confident charm that had been his defining feature was gone, replaced by a raw, frayed desperation. He was a king without a kingdom, a portrait of a man in freefall. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. He knocked again, a little weaker this time. With a slow breath, I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door, but only partway, leaving the security chain in place. We stared at each other through the narrow gap. "Rachel," he breathed, his voice hoarse. It was the first time he had spoken my name without a sneer or a command in years. "What are you doing here?" "Mark," I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of surprise or welcome. Can I come in?" "No," I said simply. He flinched, but nodded, accepting the small humiliation. He leaned his forehead against the door jamb for a second, as if gathering his strength. "They're going to take everything," he said, his voice cracking. "The house, the accounts, everything. It's called asset forfeiture. They're saying it was all proceeds of crime." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "You have to help me. Rachel, you have to go to the DA and withdraw the complaint." I almost laughed at the absurdity. The sheer, staggering ignorance of his request. He still thought this was a game I was controlling, a switch I could just flip off. I didn't file a complaint. "Mark," I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass. "The city of Oakley did, based on the findings of their own investigation." "But you started it," he shot back, a flash of his old anger returning. "You sent them the files, the data. Where did you even get it?" "I didn't send them anything," I said, which was technically true. My email had been anonymous, my package to the IRS untraceable. "Then who did?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Who sent the data?" I looked at him, at this broken man who was once my brother, my tormentor, the golden sun. I let the silence stretch, watching the hope drain from his face, replaced by a dawning dread. "Someone who wasn't invited," I said softly. The color drained from his face. My words hit him with the physical force of a slap. He understood. He finally truly understood that this hurricane of consequences, this complete obliteration of his world, could all be traced back to a single, deliberate slight, to a piece of mail he never sent. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. A tear welled in the corner of his eye and traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. "Do you hate me that much?" he whispered, his voice choked with a self-pity I found revolting. He needed this to be about hate. He needed me to be a monster, a vengeful fury, because the alternative that this was about principles, about right and wrong, was an idea he couldn't comprehend. "No," I said, and it was the honest truth. The fire of my anger had burned out, leaving only cold ash. Hate is an emotion. This was a project. This was about doing the right thing. It was about telling the truth. The thing that you and Mom and Dad always found so awkward. I used the word deliberately. A final twist of the knife. It was the word they had used to banish me, and I was using it now to define my victory. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He had nothing left to fight with. No more denials or blame to shift. All he had left was one last, desperate appeal. "The family you just destroyed," he said, his voice thick with accusation. "It was your family, too." For a second, his words found their mark. A flicker of an old wound, a deep, primal sense of loss, the ghost of a little girl who just wanted her family to love her. But then I remembered the cold, legal weight of the letter I had burned. I remembered the finality of my name being struck from a list. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "It wasn't. You made that very clear. They already wrote me out." It was the final blow. He had no response. His last weapon, the appeal to a loyalty he had never shown me, was useless. The family he was accusing me of destroying had already declared that I was not a part of it. He finally seemed to understand. He visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat. He looked down at the floor, a man with nothing left to say. I looked at him one last time. There was no triumph in this moment, no joy, just a vast, quiet emptiness, an ending. Without another word, I pushed the door closed. The chain rattled, and the lock clicked into place, the sound echoing in the silent hallway. I leaned my back against the cool wood of the door, listening. I heard nothing for a long moment, and then the soft, shuffling sound of his footsteps as he walked away. A week after Mark's visit, the story reached its final, national stage. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. The television was on, tuned to a 24-hour news network, the sound a low, ambient hum in my quiet apartment. I was drinking coffee, enjoying the simple, clean taste of it, when a new segment began. The graphic that filled the screen was stark a photo of my father's proud, stern face next to a photo of Mark's wedding day smile, with a bold red banner underneath Quinn Development from legacy to lawsuit. A polished, serious-faced anchor began the story, a story of local corruption with national implications, she said, her voice grave. Quinn Development, once a titan of the Ohio construction industry, is now facing a federal racketeering investigation. The company, founded 50 years ago by patriarch Richard Quinn, is accused of a decade-long scheme to defraud the city of Oakley and its taxpayers of millions of dollars through shell corporations and fraudulent billing. They cut to B-roll footage cranes frozen mid-air over half-finished construction sites, the locked gates of the Quinn Development headquarters, and then a clip from the public hearing, a chaotic scene of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. My family was a spectacle, their downfall packaged for mass consumption. The anchor continued. The collapse was swift, triggered by an investigation that officials say began with a single, anonymous tip, while the identity of the whistleblower remains protected. Sources close to the investigation suggest the leak of highly specific internal documents likely came from a disgruntled former employee with intimate knowledge of the company's accounting practices. The camera held on a still image of the company's logo. The proud Q, now a symbol of disgrace, a former employee. It was the closest they would ever get to the truth. The label was so sterile, so impersonal. It erased all the history, all the pain, all the complexity. I was a data point in their narrative now, a catalyst. I took another sip of my coffee. The liquid was warm, the mug solid in my hands. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical detachment. Just then, my laptop, sitting open on the table, chimed with the arrival of a new email. My eyes drifted to the screen. The sender was a producer from a major, well-respected news journalism program. The subject line read, "Interview request, a conversation on whistleblower ethics." I clicked it open. The email was effusive, filled with praise for the anonymous source's courage and civic duty. The producer wrote that they were doing a special segment on corporate integrity and the difficult choices faced by those who expose wrongdoing from within. They wanted to offer me a platform, a chance to tell my side of the story, to discuss the moral and ethical implications of my actions. They didn't say how they found me, but I knew my name must have been circulating in the journalistic ether. A person of interest, the logical suspect. They were inviting me to take my victory lap, to step into the spotlight and be celebrated as a hero. I could picture at the television studio, the earnest interviewer, the carefully crafted questions designed to paint me as a martyr for the truth. They would want to know about my pain, my struggle, my moment of decision. They would want to turn my calculated, precise project into a heart-wrenching human interest story. They would want to give me the public recognition, the validation, that I had been denied my whole life. A small smile touched my lips. I thought of the wedding I wasn't invited to. I thought of the 67 guests, the white roses, the perfect family portrait built on a mountain of lies. They had created an exclusive event, a world I was not welcome in. And in doing so, they had taught me the value of drawing my own boundaries. My fingers moved to the keyboard. My reply was short, the words flowing with an easy, final clarity. I typed it, addressed to the producer who wanted to make me a star. "Sorry, dear. This event is for family only." I hit send. There was no hesitation. I didn't need their platform. I didn't need their validation. My actions were not a performance for an audience. They were a correction to a ledger, a balancing of an account that had been in arrears for 34 years. I closed the laptop. The soft click echoed in the stillness. The last of the afternoon light streamed through the clean glass of my window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The television was still murmuring about indictments and legal proceedings, but I no longer heard it. The noise was outside. In here, there was only silence. I stood up and walked to the center of my small, uncluttered living room. I was alone. I was not a daughter, not a sister, not an heir to a fallen empire. I was just Rachel, a project manager in a quiet apartment in Denver, free. I didn't need anyone's forgiveness, because I had done nothing wrong. I didn't need anyone's recognition, because the truth was its own reward. All I ever needed was the truth. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below, and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like, and to help this story be heard by more people. Please support it by hitting that hype button. It means the world to me.